Now are Nayyera Haq, former State Department spokesperson and White House director, and Shilby Telhami, senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, and Anwar Sadat, chair for peace and development at the University of Maryland. Shilby, let me begin with you, because we've been watching the president's speech live, but imagine, because the reaction has been the president did well. But the bar was very low. This was a paced speech. But what is your reaction, and how do you think he did?
Are you asking me or?
Shibli, yes.
Yes. Sorry. So, from the point of view of the low bar, yes, of course. This is probably the most dignified speech he's ever given, certainly as president. But from the point of view of the substance of how his audiences in the Middle East take it, it's very different from the way it sounds to an American ear. Most people probably look at it as patronizing. Public opinion was totally ignored. He obviously gave the rulers what they wanted. He gave the rulers the attention of the only superpower in the world. He focused on the rulers' issues, confronting Iran, confronting militancy, no focus on democracy at all, which is what they want to hear. But the public really dismisses all of that and sounds to them like they're being lectured about Islam. So he does well in delivering what was a package deal. The rulers wanted something from him. And he wanted something from them. They gave him what he wanted. They gave him the claim that he's creating more American jobs, signing huge trade deals. He made the statement about cutting the funding to terrorists, even used the term Islamic terrorism. Certainly his audience in the U.S., they will hear that as music to their ears. So everybody's getting something except for the major elephant in the room, which is most Arab and Muslim public opinion, which will dismiss this. And when you're talking about fighting terrorism and extremism, if you ignore that element, you're losing the battle.
Well, yeah, he used the phrase Islamic extremism, and Nayyera, we were listening to this and watching together live. We only had a few excerpts prior to the president's speech. It was roughly about a half an hour long. But to Shibli's point about not lecturing the Muslim world, that was one of the direct lines that we had in advance, saying we are not here to lecture, we are not here to tell other people how to live or what to do, who to be or how to worship. Instead, we're here to offer partnership based on shared interests, values, and to pursue a better future for all of us. From the two futures that the president laid out, how do you think he did, and do you think that the Muslim world is going to embrace that the onus is on them to drive out terrorists?
Well, it certainly was a speech designed, as Shibli said, for the rulers themselves, who frankly are dealing with their own challenges of having an educated, employed public. Right now, you have 60% of the Muslim world in the Middle East is under the age of 25. That is a burgeoning population that has been at the core of addressing the long-term solution to violent extremism. So it's not just a matter of addressing the rulers as he did today. And we say rulers very carefully because the majority of the people in the room are not democratically elected leaders. So these are people also who are looking to maintain power in a very authoritarian and rigid way. So these rulers are not interested in things like raising the minimum wage. I remember talking to one Gulf royal member, a Gulf family royal member, who had asked me what the point was of even having a minimum wage. So there's a major cultural disconnect when we're talking about our communities having shared interests, whereas our leaders certainly do. They have an interest in managing the war-torn environment that they live in the Middle East. They have a shared interest in keeping U.S. troops out of the Middle East. Certainly nobody in the Middle East wants to see another Iraq, and they're watching very closely to see what the United States does in Syria and Iran as well. So this was a speech targeted very much for the rulers in the room, for a domestic U.S. audience, but not necessarily leading to the underlying underpinnings that will solve long-term extremism.
So, Shibli, obviously with the president delivering this speech, it was a quiet and controlled environment. There was no applause. There was no real reaction to certain lines that the president delivered. Do you think that he appeared inspirational, that he also appeared to be someone that these people can coalesce around that vision?
Well, first of all, let's look at it. Was he inspirational to us? Well, he was more presidential, frankly, than we have seen him to an American eye and ear. But in the Middle East, remember, people there want him or like him for their own purposes, meaning the people who are in the room, the rulers who are in the room. He addressed their issues. They like him on Iran. They like closeness to him. They like that he's not going to push them on democracy. They like all of that. But the public around them, they don't see him as inspirational. The public sees them as lecturing them. And frankly, look at the headlines. What's the takeaway? So you look at the different headlines around us. So Al Arabiya television online, which is owned by Saudi Arabia, they have two headlines out of this. One is, the king says, we don't blame the Iranian people for the crimes of the regime. Iran, number one. Trump says Iran funds and arms terrorist groups. Iran, number two. The Hezbollah Manar stake of Hezbollah, their headline is, the Saudis sign a $400 billion deal with the U.S., obviously meaning at time of austerity, they're buying weapons, and so that's the one they want to highlight. So everybody is going to spin it their way. By the way, here in the U.S., too, I mean, Breitbart led with the Islamic terrorism. They're giving him credit for it. Fox leads with the cutting off funding for terrorism, as if it was a new idea. This has been, every administration has done it, including the Obama administration, but it's framed as if it was a new idea. But he scores with the base with that. But I think, in general, on the way over here to the studio, I got a call from an Arab North African friend. He says, what a joke. After listening to the speeches, as if it was like a theater they're watching. We've seen this movie again. Unfortunately, that's the way it comes across to the public in the region.
Well, another thing that's pretty interesting out of this, Nayyera, is the fact is we're learning about what Shibli just mentioned there, the arms sale that the U.S. signed with Saudi Arabia. We're also learning details of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates combined giving $100 million to a charity started by Ivanka Trump, the Women's Entrepreneurs Fund, aimed at helping women in the Middle East. This is also something that Trump went after Clinton about, saying that here's a woman that takes all this money from these countries and then she says she loves women. This is what he told Fox News host Sean Hannity. How can she be? They want to kill, they want to throw them off buildings, they actually throw gays off buildings, and she takes money. I'm calling for her to give back all of the money she's taken from these countries. Now Ivanka Trump, after her husband negotiates this $110 billion plus deal for arms, is getting a $100 million payday for her charity?
Well, this is what is going to be a steep learning curve for this administration that diplomats have learned and know and are aware of, which is that the Gulf states, which are largely kingdoms and emirates, are willing to throw lots and lots of money at problems to put a veneer of problem solving on it. We've been dealing with this challenge of illicit terrorist financing since 9/11, and that's been under the Bush and Obama administration. Suddenly putting a group together to combine resources or for women, for terrorist financing, where they're sharing money is not going to be answering the problem. This is not one of those throwing more money at the problem solutions, particularly as this is all happening in a country where women aren't even allowed to drive. Women are barely allowed to vote, and they still have to have a male member of their family as a guardian. With that said, that is part of why the Muslim world is reacting so strongly to this speech, because the Muslim world is far more diverse than just Arabs. The largest population of Muslims in the world is in India and Indonesia, and those are not the kinds of people in terms of appearance that you saw in the room with President Trump today. They also are having their own challenge with fighting Saudi strains of Islam and the Saudi extremism. So saying that because we have a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, that we're fighting Iran, is not necessarily supporting the more moderate and progressive strains of Islam in the rest of the world that are seeking and looking for U.S. support.
Nayyera Haq and Shibli Talami, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.